Chapter 5 The Unknown. Where do we go from here? Leviathan was looking over his shoulder, with Andor and Falstaff leading the way. The town of Parthen began to grow sleepy within the approach of nightfall. They were miles from home and deep in the Trude Mountains, where they arrived at the dwarven village. Avador stopped short and scanned the area with his keen elven eyes. The village was not on level ground. Built in the mountains, the houses and structures were situated on all kinds of points and altitudes. The roads barely leveled off, usually winding upwards or downwards, twisting between the stone-built buildings and disappearing into the darkness. The only thing I am completely sure of, Leviathan, is that we need to get some rest. Avador answered, noting the darkness overcoming the village. He's right, Falstaff agreed. We've been traveling since last night without rest, and it is night again. Frankly, I couldn't use a hot bath and a solid drink. He scratched at his short black beard and looked around uncomfortably. The events after the disappearance of Grandolimus were a whirlwind of haste. Avador, after finding the strength to calm himself down and suppress his anger at his friends for holding him back, decided that they were right. The Elf King had his reasons for doing what he did. He always had his reasons, and no one questioned him regardless at how illogical everything seemed. Avador had returned home. He briefly relayed the disastrous events to his mother and told her he had to leave. It was all a complete shock to Symmetra Andor, and she protested in utter disbelief. Her husband disappeared, and now her son was leaving too? The young elf remained firm to his actions and packed whatever he could for food in a leather traveling sack and slung it over his shoulder. He went to his parents' room and retrieved his longbow and quiver of arrows, which he had originally used for hunting. What he found bizarre was that his father's battle clothes were missing. Everything else the Elf King used remained where he had left them. The near-weightless shield with the Andor insignia of a black tree on a deep blue background still hung on the bedroom wall above the bed. The long, jagged dagger and the broadsword that he used in battle were also left behind. The sword that his father admiringly called the King Blade, was still in the room. Avador buckled it, still in its scabbard, to his waist, along with the dagger. After a moment and a long exhale, the young elf exited his parents' bedroom and faced his mother once again. He dropped everything he held and embraced her. She did not want to let go. With an excruciating effort, he took his things and left the house, promising he will return. He did not look back, knowing that if he did, he would stay. Instead, he looked ahead to where his two friends, stubborn as they were against his protests, waited for him to go along. Avador took his companions around a corner of stone building where they crouched in silence and merged with the shadows. The owners of the home were asleep, so they moved ahead silently to avoid any unnecessary attention. The road ahead led to the building alive with lights and commotion. Dwarves entered and exited periodically, some laughing and some quietly minding their business. The three, wrapped in their traveling cloaks, gave the impression of wraiths as they navigated the darkening light. They approached and read the wooden sign that dangled on a pole over the entrance, the Spider's Web. Grandolimus had spoken of this place in the past to Avador. A tavern, doubled as an inn for travelers exploring the Trude Mountains. A place to rest, but keep your wits sharp. The three remained fixed at the base of the wooden porch before the entrance. A drunken dwarf poured out the door and nearly plunged headfirst down the steps. Leviathan instinctively caught the man as he fell. "Pardon me, milady," the dwarf said, looking up with a grin and glossy eyes. Then he stumbled off, mumbling something about how big they make women nowadays. Tigran Leviathan didn't know whether to be insulted or to just laugh. "I think it's safe to go in," he said, turning a little red in color. The tavern was seedy-looking at first appearance. In one corner, two burly dwarves were locked in an arm-wrestling match with a handful of spectators holding out pouches of coin and placing bets. The interior was designed mostly with wood and timbered planks for the flooring. Dim lanterns, hung here and there, illuminated the tavern with their soft glow. People were chattering amongst themselves in loud voices. A dwarf barmaid, short and stocky like the men, but with a cheerful smile, skittered from table to serve drinks. Second barmaid was getting ready to start work, for the tavern would get busier as the night progressed. A balding barman with a huge red beard paused at cleaning an ale mug when the three strangers walked through the door and waited watchfully at the entrance. Abruptly, everything stopped. The usual disorder of the tavern, the noise, the chatter, it all came to a sudden halt, and everyone's attention fell to the three cloaked figures standing uncomfortably at the entrance. "Why are they watching us like that?" Falstaff whispered out of the corner of his mouth. "Maybe it's because we're armed to the teeth," Tigran Leviathan answered back, adjusting a large bulky shield strapped to his back. Without another word, Avador found an empty table in the middle of the bar and sat down. The companions did the same, looking around and smiling. This made the dwarfs gawk even harder, with open mouths. "I think you should have found a table where we could put our backs to the wall. I don't think they trust us," Leviathan said quietly while still smiling at the curious patrons. The barman then broke from his curiosity trance and gave the barmaid a gentle shove towards their direction. Hesitantly, but with a newly formed smile, she approached the companion's table. Um, we'll have a large pitcher of ale, please," Avador said politely. The barmaid smiled, broadened, and without a word went to get the order. Eventually, the noise level rose back to its usual height, and things were back to normal. "We'll stay here for the night," Avador said to his friends. "I'll try and get some information before we leave." "Leave to where?" Falstaff said abruptly. "How do you even know where we have to go?" "Avador knows," Tigran intercepted the conversation. "Somehow he knows. We are here to support him, not question him." The three stopped talking when the barmaid returned with a large pitcher of ale and 3 tin mugs. "So, boys," she said sweetly, "is there a war going on that we don't know about?" The companions smiled politely. No, Avador replied swiftly. "We just finished some combat training, and now we're heading home." The lie was obvious, and the young elf cringed to himself. The barmaid remained smiling and placed the ale and mugs in front of the young travelers. Avador took some copper coins from his pouch and paid her. She left them alone to their drinks and went about her business. Eventually the bar became smoky and packed as the night moved on. Avador stood up and walked to the barman as soon as he noticed he had a moment to talk. "Respects and good wishes," he said to the barman, and was greeted with a smile. "Is it possible to get a room for tonight?" The barman looked the young elf up and down before answering. "We have a room upstairs, the third one on the right." His voice was gruff but friendly. "It's a little small for 3 big fellows such as yourselves, but it's the last one left." Avador was about to reply when he saw the barman's eyes widen into the size of teacup saucers. Without a moment's hesitation, the young elf whirled and took a defensive stance and realized that he wasn't in danger. Falstaff had been pulled from his chair. He was half crouching and half standing, and firmly held back by a very irate dwarf. There was a flash of steel, and Avador caught sight of a knife held against his friend's throat, dangerously cutting into his skin. "This is an outrage," the dwarf roared, thrusting Falstaff's chin upward like a lamb to be slaughtered. "Why do we allow evil such as this in our village? He is here to throw a foul curse at our feet." He was clearly inebriated, and judging by the work clothes he still wore, he had been in the tavern all day. Something large and heavy suddenly flew across the crowded room, and the drunken dwarf was struck down. Falstaff was immediately on his feet, holding his throat. His attacker lay motionless on the floor, with a hefty warhammer on his chest. His teeth were smashed out, and he bled freely from his mouth. The tavern went still, as if petrified in time. "I told him to go home hours ago." A single dwarf, brawny in a black vest, sauntered through the mass of people. His arms swelled with muscle, his stride solid and sure. The people made way for him as he passed. Without acknowledging anybody, he picked up the heavy hammer and left the way he had come from somewhere behind the bar. Tigran and Avador sat a few moments with Falstaff. Somewhat shaken, the young companions waited as the patrons, losing their appetite for drinking anymore, cleared out of the smoky tavern. "Are you all right, Falstaff?" Tigran asked the young scholar. "Nothing hurt but my pride," he retorted. Avador and his companions spent the night in the little room that the barkeep had offered. The rest of the night was uneventful, and they slept undisturbed until morning. The first signs of daylight trickled into the room from behind a thick curtain. Dust hovered, not quite motionless, in the air, exposed only where light was shed. The little room became stuffy and dank, not having the proper ventilation with the closed window. Tigran and Falstaff awoke to finding Avador missing from the spot on the floor he had slept on. But within minutes the door opened and he had returned. "How are you guys?" The young elf seemed well rested and perky. "I told you we should have made camp in the mountains," Falstaff answered, rubbing the back of his neck. "These beds are made for dwarves, and you two taking the floor didn't help my situation at all." "We were just trying to be gentlemen, Falstaff," Tigran replied with a smirk and a wink to Avador. "After all, you had a traumatizing night last night. We couldn't let you take the floor." Avador began packing his gear, and the two companions did the same. Within moments they were down below and into an empty tavern. The red-bearded barman was the sole person downstairs, and he was busy fixing the legs of a broken chair. "Hello again, Norcio," Avador greeted him merrily. "Greetings, lad," the dwarf replied without looking up from his work. "There are eggs and smoked pork waiting for you and your friends in the kitchen behind the bar." They ate eagerly, famished from the meager meals they rationed for the trip to the dwarven village. Avador pulled out 6 silver pieces and handed them to Norcio. The dwarf gave the young elf a look of warning and shoved the coins back into Avador's hand. "I told you, young elfling, you will pay nothing more for your stay here." His eyes were serious, and Avador knew there was no arguing with him. "Now you remember the directions I gave you?" "I do." "Take the pack I have set for you from the bar counter. There are provisions for all of you for at least a few weeks. If you are careful, that is." The red-bearded dwarf rested 2 stout hands on the elf's shoulders. "Sorry, I cannot offer more." "You have offered more than I could have ever asked of you, Norcio." The young elf shook hands with the barkeep and handed the leather pack with the replenished supplies to Tigran. The rest of the party were half in shock, not knowing how Avador managed to win so much favor from the burly barkeep. Outside, the air was fresh with sharpness to it. Avador looked around and concluded that the weather was changing. The sun was lower in the horizon, and surrounding mountain peaks hid it from view. He led his friends down twisty cobblestone streets that wound up and down between the stone-built homes. The villagers were mostly away in the fields situated just on the outskirts of the now quiet hamlet. He came to a T-intersection and chose the road that went right. Few dwarves that remained gave them curious glances, but nothing more, as they carried on with their daily routines. The road led out of the village and eventually turned into a dirt pathway. "What happened back at the inn?" Falstaff's curiosity got the better of him. "Norcio recognized me," Avador answered frankly. "He knew my father during his travels through these mountains and remembered me as his son that came with him. I remembered him as well early this morning when I awoke and went downstairs. It's been many years since I came with my father to the foot of these mountains. He admitted at first he wasn't sure who I was, but this morning he had no doubt I was the son of King Grandalimus." Avador took them off the path and into a wooded patch that offered some cover. They sat under a large pine and drank from their water flasks. The elf waited a few moments before speaking again. "I will tell you now what we are here to do," he said without looking away from his feet. Falstaff and Tigran watched their friend patiently until he continued. "I am not sure how to begin to tell you this, so I guess straightforward is the best way." He took a deep inhale before carrying on. "Last night, before the sun came up, I had left our room for the first time." His friends gave him a perplexed look, but he continued without pausing. "My father speaks to me," he said bluntly, ignoring the look of surprise. Sometimes during the night, between the night and day, he beckons me. I do not know where he is, for he never reveals his location, but I feel him calling to me rather than hear him. He paused now, looking up to meet his companion's eyes. To his surprise, he found absolutely no disbelief, only curiosity. How does he talk with you? Why only during those strange hours? Avador smiled at the utter loyalty his friends had for him. There was a sound of steel against steel. Avador had unsheathed the king blade and held it before his friends. The broad blade gleamed a sheer white in the daylight. The polished dark blue hilt held effortlessly in both hands and felt warm to Avador's touch. This sword is magic. Avador glanced over at Falstaff and gave him a wink. Tigran Aviathane began to laugh, but Avador put a finger to his lips, cutting him short. With this, Avador said, waving the blade in a short arc, my father finds me. The two humans stared at each other, not sure what to think. How? Tigran asked. None of the company had ever seen any magic, and the possibility of it being in their presence was somewhat bewildering. I don't know how it works, Aviathane, Avador answered, but I know what it does. Somehow, through the sword, the king blade as my father calls it, he summons me during the small hours before night turns to day. I go outside and I hear his voice in my mind as I hold the sword before me. He tells me where to go. He wants us to find him. My father has fled for reasons no one understands, but I am sure it's because of something against his will. But if he wants us to find him, why hasn't he told you where he is? Falstaff asked. He's preparing me by sending us to certain places to obtain help along the way. That's how I know where we have to go. For now, anyways, he tells me where we must go before giving me his location. The young elf stood up and gathered his things. That is all I know for the moment, my friends. Where do we have to go now? Tigran asked, both wanting to know. That way, Avador pointed and continued down the dirt path leading away from the village. The trail went on for another hour. The sun was higher in the horizon and directly in front of them, which made it difficult to see past its powerful glare. There were patches of trees on either side of the trail in periodic stages as they advanced down the slender dirt road. Their leaves were beginning to transform from their original green to brilliant reds and golds. The terrain before them took an almost dramatic change. It sloped significantly, giving a magnificent view of a hilly landscape that coursed downwards for miles before turning into another mountainous backdrop. They continued for a few moments when Avador found what he was looking for. The cottage was in a bit of a mess and in bad need of arrangement for all the clutter that littered the grounds around it. It was a small stone structure with a brick chimney that spouted thick gray smoke. A broken wagon with a missing wheel lay on its side near a heap of lumber. Tools lay scattered everywhere in an indiscernible pattern for what the owner had in mind. Approaching the dwelling, the companions heard the sound of hammering coming from behind the overturned wagon. They walked cautiously, not to alarm whoever was working, and found a very strongly built dwarf with his bare back turned to them, hammering at a spike in the belly of the wagon. If yous are here for a cup of tea, you can go elsewhere, the burly dwarf said, startling the three travelers. Immediately they recognized him as the dwarf with the battle hammer back at the spider's web. He stood and looked up at them, waiting for some kind of reply. Greetings, Avador spoke up instantly. We were directed here from Norcio, the barkeep of the spider's web. The young elf never finished what he had to say when the taciturn dwarf's eyes widened and he suddenly dropped to one knee, bowing his head. You are the son of the king of the elves, the stocky dwarf whispered. My life is yours. The three companions stood there, not knowing what to do. I am Stone Warhelm, soldier and right hand of Grandolimus, my king and the king of all elvenkind. Well, that concludes chapter 5. Hope you like the new format, but gonna experiment with some stuff over the next few videos, see what I like to do. Leave some comments, tell me what you think.